Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sally himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
Let's start with some good news coming off the island of Seychelles. For the first time in 43 years, the opposition claimed victory or won the presidential election. Your thoughts, Shaka?
First of all, I have to agree with you that it is an incredible feat. In fact, a uniquely rare feat, especially for a party that ruled because it actually came into power back in 1977. They call it a coup, but in fact it was a sort of invasion from Tanzania. It was the Tanzanian trained revolutionaries who were supporting Albert Rene, who had been a prime minister and had actually 77 started his own opposition party. He was ideologically compatible with what was happening in Tanzania under Mwalimu Kambarage Julius Nyerere. And he was also actually compatible with what was happening then at what used to be the Soviet Union. So basically what happened is the Seychelles regained its political independence from Britain in 1976. And the founding president was a gentleman who you and I had the privilege of meeting so many years ago back in Washington when he was signing his memoirs.
Yes,
James
Merchant.
James Mancham. He had previously studied law in the United Kingdom and had actually formed a political party called the Seychelles Democratic Party in 76 before he finally became the first president of the island. He had hardly been in power while attending the Commonwealth Conference in London in 1977 when his fate was sealed. And I think being a Ugandan, you are not unmindful of the fact that there was also a Ugandan
Milton Obote.
Dr. Apollo Milton Obote, who also had previously been attending the Commonwealth Heads of State and Heads of Government Summit in London. But in his particular case, back in 1971, when he also was overthrown by a military coup led by General Idi Amin Dada. So it looks like, the Commonwealth Summit sometimes are not particularly pleasant for some unlucky African leaders.
It used to be the case, but now things have changed.
Well, things have changed because the international community has figured it out. If you overthrow a government courtesy of AK-47, not many people are willing to do business as usual with you, which is a very good thing, which is why I often say that should be extended to cover those governments which engage in either stealing an election or call it rigging an election or using the method of creative accounting, that those types of results which do not reflect the will of the people or the will of the voter should be treated equally the same as military coups. Because in fact, they accomplish the same goal, which is the overthrow of constitutional order.
Despite what is going on this year, a lot of people have said 2020 is a dead year. But we've had some greater news, especially for people who have been in opposition, at the same time being leaders in church. We have President Lazarus Chakwera in Malawi, and now we have a priest, Waivo Ramakalwan, who defeated the President Danny Fure by 54.9% of the vote. This is a remarkable thing, considering that he already has a huge following. He's been a man of of the church, a man of God, and now I think he's going to take his leadership skills to the national level. Your thoughts, Shaka?
Well, I think, Paul, what happens is that people were very tired. They were very tired, sincerely, to live under the rule of one party for 43 years. And the island of Seychelles is made up of people who are socially and politically, who are relatively more socially and politically conscious, aware. It's a very small place, really.
About 100,000 people.
Yes, and by its very nature and the strategic area where it occupies, especially because their number one import probably is tourism. So they have such a diverse culture. So they have the opportunity to interact with lots of cultures and lots of ideas and what have you. So I think it reached a point where, because they are aware of what is going on in the region and beyond, and especially more recently, when you look at the opportunity to interact or to use the tool of social media, which gives you the opportunity to get to know what is happening in your neighborhood, in your region, and beyond. It brings that type of information on your fingertips. And it, in fact, comes to you as it happens. They were able to take that advantage, which means that even the people, in fact, in charge of handling the election are probably also relatively more socially and politically conscious, to the extent that they do their job with dignity. And they do their job knowing exactly what it means, and that's exactly what they have been able to do. Because when you look at the percentages that come out of the elections, you can see clearly that it was a very highly competitive election. This was not a selection by any means. It was an election.
So it was democracy at play.
I think it was democracy at play, and it certainly bodes well for the democratization process in Africa. And in fact, the man who won said that, in his words, there were neither losers nor winners. He probably could have said it was the people of Seychelles, in fact, who won, and it was also democracy that won, and indeed African democracy, because Seychelles joins several other countries on the continent that have actually been getting it right.
Shaka, you're right, because it looks like he was more conciliatory towards Mr. Fure, saying that they are very close friends and he's looking forward to working with him. So, in other words, he extended the olive branch to him.
Yes, and in fact, they have already set precedents in history. Because the man that overthrew, for example, the founding president, James Mancham, back in 1977, Albert Rene, that man also eventually figured out a way of working with James Mancham and essentially giving him back his dignity, to the extent that when James Mancham died in 2017, he was actually given the honor of being buried in the State House Cemetery as a former head of state, a former president of the Seychelles. So that's a very good thing. But you know what? I am one of those people who have copiously quoted Albert Einstein, Professor Albert Einstein, who, of course, is famous for having said that if you continue doing, the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, that must be insanity. In this particular case, the guy that has actually won the election, the Anglican priest, Ramakarawana, has actually defied the odds. Mind you, he actually tried 7 times. And on the 7th, he actually nailed it.
Shaka, this is interesting in so many ways. When you think about trying 7 times and losing, but not losing hope, what does this say to the future of politics in that country, to the future of opposition in Africa, where opposition tries and tries and tries, but he never gave up? And I guess finally he's able to say, I never gave up. How can opposition in different countries maybe learn from this example in Seychelles?
You can, but again, it depends which part of the African continent you are talking about. Because when you look at Southern Africa, there seems to be a trend of democracy. There seems to be a trend. And in fact, they do have what is called the SADC, the Southern African Development Community Electoral Code, which actually promotes the values of democracy. And so, without necessarily going further into details, I think that if you are in Southern Africa, you are more likely to get it politically than if you were, for example, in East Africa, or if you were in Central Africa, or North Africa. But if you were in Southern Africa, and probably in West Africa, you can look at the facts on the ground. There are more countries in those 2 regions that have actually become or joined the Democratic Club.
The new president was sworn in on Monday, but there are a lot of critics. Let's go to Patrick, who says that the result is a political earthquake here in the Seychelles. But the new president obviously has so much that he's going to deal with. There is high level of corruption, people yearning for change. There is really not much that goes around from the government coffers to do certain things for ordinary people, despite the fact that they have this enormous potential that they tap in of tourism.
I think you are right. And tourism, of course, also has the disadvantage these days because of operating under the conditions of the coronavirus pandemic. So when you talk about the tourism industry and the hospitality industry, those countries that benefited enormously from those types of industries have, in recent months, have really been experiencing plenty of problems. He will have, of course, to be very creative, very innovative, and he may be lucky in the sense that within months, the vaccine or some effective and safe therapies that deals with the COVID-19 may by then have been procured. So that could in fact ease conditions so that the industry of hospitality and tourism can actually begin to pick up.
There are some people who argue that being an Anglican priest, maybe he's used to that kind of stuff. He's used to leading where the government has failed, helping people where they need help. And arguably he could actually turn out to be one of the best presidents they have ever had, because he's used to dealing with the common person, the ordinary folk.
Well, let's hope that you're right. But I'm reminded, for example, by a statement issued by Dr. Henry Kissinger when he was a prominent U.S. Secretary of State for Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. He once talked about how politics is not religion, and religion is not politics. And he had to know something about it, because not only was he the Secretary of State, but he was a professor of politics to boot for many years at Harvard University.
That's a perfect segue. Let's go from the Indian Ocean all the way to West Africa. Nigeria. Protests continue despite the fact that the government has made some concessions, but it looks like nothing the government can do that is going to stop these young people whose time has come. It's about time they change some of these policies.
I think the issue on the surface may look like police brutality, but in fact, the issue is much, much larger than that. The issue, in fact, is about identifying the fundamental root causes of the problem and begin to address those issues. And those issues are likely to reflect the absence of social, economic, political, cultural justice for all, and especially for the small guy. I am reminded of what happened, for example, in 2010 in some North African countries. That period, those events are regarded as the Arab Spring, although I don't really know where that language came from, because we are talking about Africa. Why couldn't it possibly be the African Spring? The thing is, when you look at what brought about the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia, where for many years a Mr. Ahmed Bourguiba, who used to talk about how he was the system and the system was Bourguiba. It happened that there were so many young, educated people, very many educated people, but with no prospects for a job. The cost of living was very, very high. It was very difficult for people to negotiate their way around the things that are important to life. Immediately, you know what happened? Immediately, in fact, the reason you had changes in Tunisia was because of the youth. And the youth, in a sense, pressured some government institutions, including the military. It came to the extent of where the military had to choose between dictator Ben Ali. Was it Ben Ali?
Yes, you're correct.
Dictator Ben Ali and their sons and daughters, their cousins, their nephews and nieces. And eventually what happened was they chose the people of Tunisia. Ben Ali had immediately no choice but to flee, to head for the nearest political tall grass in Saudi Arabia, and they have since died.
Yes.
Then you had, of course, also the situation in the Tahrir Square in Egypt. It was pretty much, again, championed and led by the young people, the youth. So I think that there are certain fundamental issues that need to be looked at in Nigeria, the land of the ogres, so that they can be addressed. And by the way, the land of the ogres also happens to be one of those few countries on the African continent where there are so many educated people. in addition, of course, to being the most populous nation on the continent, where there are millions and millions of people chasing very few things. By the way, even in the United States of America, the last time I checked, there was in fact a research done about education. And you know what its conclusion was? That the most educated community in the United States was in fact the Nigerians, the Nigerian community. When you talk about, for example, undergraduate degrees, you talk about graduate degrees, you talk about professional degrees, you're talking about Nigeria.
As much as the young people are pushing, the government is pushing back. Last week, the Nigerian police chief ordered the immediate mobilization of all police resources to bring pressure to bear to stop these protests. Can they succeed?
I don't think so. See, again, you have to realize that those policemen are not living in isolation. Those policemen are related to some of those young people. Those policemen, they are related to some of the people that are doing the suffering for all of them. So at the end of the day, it's a question of who actually has the will. And it's a question of whether or not one is in fact fighting for a just cause. If you are fighting for the battle for your stomach, you don't really have to have a PhD in philosophy or in economics or in politics to know that that person who is fighting to feed himself, to put food on the table for his or her family, is fighting for a just cause. Because at the end of the day, when you look at Nigeria, Nigeria does not belong to the few ogres. There are so many ogres who are so rich, who actually own private jets, who actually own mansions in Ikoyi, some of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Nigeria, Victoria.
Victoria
And those
Island.
same people also, by the way, have actually mansions in the United States.
Right.
You can go to Potomac.
One of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Washington, D.C.
Yes, in the world. And when you see these same people, they also actually have property in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in London, Hampstead.
How about people who said that, for example, the police has every right, or the government has every right to push back, especially considering the fact that you have people who have hijacked these protests, people who are looting, who are destroying property, and who are doing all sorts of things to make the government look bad?
I agree. I agree absolutely that in that particular case, they have a point. It is true that for the most part, the protests have really been peaceful, made up of young people for 2 weeks. But of course, as it often happens, even here in the United States, you get some opportunists who basically take advantage of those opportunities and hijack those opportunities for their own selfish, pettish, personal, corporate interests. There has been reported a lot of looting, a lot of arson, burning property, burning government offices and what have you. And the youth have said that under no circumstances were they in fact part of that kind of behavior. And you can look at their record, because for 2 weeks, they were actually protesting in a peaceful manner. But suddenly, you have these other people who are probably part of the organized crime.
So how would you respond to people who said that in some cases, for example, in Lagos last week, some armed security people opened live fire, ended up killing about 12 people? And Amnesty International and other people are calling those human rights abuses, to the extent that they are calling for the people involved to be prosecuted.
Yes, I have seen those reports, in fact, by Amnesty International. I think what the government needs to do sincerely, the government, if it has any respect for its citizens, it ought to at least immediately form some kind of commission of inquiry. They make some investigations and find out exactly what happened, who did what, to whom, and what have you, so that at the end of the day, if they can correct the evidence that they think can help them to take some of these individuals through due process in order for them to be prosecuted if they indeed committed those crimes, or any crimes for that matter, I think that's what should happen.
How about the power of social media? The young people, the youth who are actively involved on social media, they look at it as a rallying point, something that has literally connected them to one another. It's like as if I'm watching events happen live in Nigeria when I'm seated here in Washington, D.C. How much has social media contributed to these protests that we see?
Well, first of all, social media, of course, as you know, is a very useful tool. It is a very useful tool in the sense that it helps the protesters, for example, to mobilize and organize and execute. And as I often say, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind, and I'm saying this from the deepest better part of the bottom of my Kabari heart and soul. The future of Africa is very safe in the hands of the changing demographics, because in fact, they're increasingly becoming the majority on the continent in their rights. And when it comes to politics, numbers matter. It is the numbers game, stupid. And I think that with the changing demographics, in tandem with the power of the social media, I can see them bringing about a sort of paradigm shift, so that we no longer continue to do things as we have always done. I think that whether we like it or not, this is certainly a new dawn. And it is a new dawn that is likely to begin and end with the new generation, with the young generation. And I think that it is really high time that our generation passes on the baton. Because whether you pass on the baton to the younger generation or not, history is not going to be favorable to us. Because one way or the other, the changing demographics are going to be calling shots sooner or later. And in fact, I would like to think that this is their moment.
This is our moment. So on that note, we'll end it here. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time.
Thank you very much, Ndugupor, and good luck with your moment.
Thank you so much. Are you handing me the baton?
You got it, baby. You got it.
Okay, I will take you up on that. Thank you.
Okay.